Welcome to this comprehensive lecture series on learning theories and memory processes. I'm delighted to guide you through this fascinating journey into how we learn and remember. This is video 1 of an 8-part series that will thoroughly cover your syllabus content. Today, we'll establish the foundational concepts and then explore our first learning theorist, Edward Thorndike. Let's begin. Learning refers to a relatively permanent change in behavior or knowledge that results from experience. Let me emphasize the key components of this definition. First, the change is relatively permanent. This distinguishes learning from temporary changes like fatigue. When you learn to ride a bicycle, that skill stays with you, even if you don't practice for years. Second, learning involves a change in either behavior or knowledge. Sometimes this change is observable, like learning to swim or speak a new language. And sometimes it's internal, like understanding a concept or forming new beliefs. This distinction became crucial in the cognitive revolution, as we'll discuss later. Third, learning results from experience. This excludes changes due to biological maturation. A baby learns to walk partly through maturation, but learning to walk skillfully requires experience and practice. So, learning explains how organisms acquire new skills, habits, information, attitudes, and behaviors. It's the fundamental process through which experience shapes who we are. Learning means gaining new information or behaviors, and memory lets that learning last. Memory works through 3 steps. Encoding. This is changing what you sense into a form your brain can store. For example, when you read a textbook, your brain turns words and images into concepts you understand. Storage. This means keeping information over time. Some memories last seconds, others can last a lifetime. Our brain uses sensory, short-term and long-term memory systems for this. Retrieval. This is accessing stored information when you need it. For instance, if you've ever had a tip of the tongue moment, you know the information but can't quite recall it. Without memory, nothing we learn would stick. Every face, word or skill would feel brand new each time. Learning and memory are tightly connected. Learning creates memories and memories show that learning took place. Learning and memory are central to understanding all psychological processes and behaviors. Learning theories clarify why we have certain habits, acquire skills, and respond emotionally, using concepts like conditioning and social learning. All mental tasks such as thinking, reasoning, and problem-solving depend on memory and learning. Cognitive abilities grow through learning. Developmental psychology studies how children learn at different ages and how early experiences shape them. Understanding learning and memory helps in treating phobias, modifying behavior, and addressing trauma and anxiety. Research guides how to present material, effective study methods, and support for students with learning challenges. These processes explain why people differ in their learning abilities and memory vividness. To understand learning and memory, we must first look at the early days of psychology. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, psychology was still in its infancy. It was largely philosophical and exploratory in nature. Psychologists focused on conscious experience, what people think, feel, and perceive. One major method used was introspection, where individuals examined their own thoughts and sensations. Wilhelm Wundt used introspection to study conscious processes, while William James introduced functionalism, asking an important question: what purpose do mental processes serve? At this stage, learning and memory were discussed conceptually, but psychology lacked strict experimental methods. In the early 20th century, psychology took a dramatic turn with the rise of behaviorism. Behaviorists argued that psychology should be a scientific discipline, studying only what can be directly observed, behavior. Mental states, thoughts, and consciousness were rejected as unscientific because they could not be measured. This led to the famous black box approach, where psychologists focused only on what goes in, the stimulus, and what comes out, the response, while ignoring what happens inside the mind. Key figures shaped this era. John B. Watson founded behaviorism. Ivan Pavlov demonstrated classical conditioning. Edward Thorndike proposed laws of learning. B.F. Skinner developed operant conditioning, and Clark Hull attempted mathematical explanations of learning. All learning, according to behaviorists, was explained through observable stimulus-response connections. By the 1950s, psychologists began to notice serious limitations in behaviorism. How could conditioning alone explain language learning, problem solving, or creativity? A major turning point came when Noam Chomsky criticized Skinner's explanation of language acquisition, arguing that mental structures must exist. At the same time, researchers began to demonstrate the importance of internal mental processes. Edward Tolman showed latent learning, suggesting that organisms form cognitive maps. Jean Piaget showed that children actively construct knowledge. George Miller introduced information processing ideas. This period became known as the cognitive revolution, where the mind was compared to a computer that processes information scientifically. From the 1960s onward, psychology entered the modern integrative era. Rather than choosing between behavior or mental processes, psychologists began combining multiple approaches. Today, learning and memory are understood through behavioral observations, cognitive theories, and neuroscientific evidence. Advances in brain imaging technologies allow scientists to observe neural activity during learning and memory tasks. This integration led to the development of cognitive neuroscience, bridging the gap between mind and brain. Modern psychology recognizes that earlier theories were not wrong, each contributed essential insights. Learning is now understood as a product of behavior, cognition, and brain processes working together. Edward Lee Thorndike was born in 1874 in Massachusetts and lived until 1949. He is widely regarded as the father of educational psychology, and his influence on learning theory and education is profound. Thorndike did not begin his career in psychology. He initially studied English literature, but his exposure to the work of William James sparked a deep interest in psychology. He went on to pursue graduate studies at Harvard University under William James and later completed his doctoral work at Columbia University under James McKeen Cattell.
Thorndike's doctoral research focused on studying learning in chickens, which marked the beginning of his lifelong interest in animal learning. He specifically chose animals as his subjects because he aimed to study learning scientifically and objectively. By using animals, he could avoid the complications associated with language, introspection, and conscious self-reporting. This approach enabled Thorndike to directly observe learning and identify fundamental principles based purely on behavior.
Thorndike is credited with pioneering educational psychology, the application of psychological principles to teaching and learning. Before his work, education was largely based on tradition, intuition, and philosophical ideas. Thorndike transformed this approach by introducing empirical research and systematic measurement. He strongly advocated for objective assessment, recognition of individual differences, and evidence-based teaching methods, laying the foundation for modern educational practices. Thorndike's most important theoretical contribution was connectionism. According to this theory, learning occurs through the formation of connections or associations between stimuli and responses. This stimulus-response framework became a foundational idea for behaviorism. Later behaviorists such as John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner built directly upon Thorndike's ideas. Thorndike was extraordinarily productive, publishing hundreds of research articles and dozens of books on animal learning, intelligence testing, and educational methods. He developed some of the earliest intelligence and achievement tests, many principles of which are still used today. His philosophy is captured in his famous quote, "Psychology helps to measure the probability that an aim is attainable." He believed psychology must be scientific, measurable, and practical, serving real-world goals. With this foundation, we now turn to his most famous research, the puzzle box experiments, which revealed how learning actually occurs.